So Pastor Debbie's time with the children, they're always excellent, aren't they? But today's was particularly on point and was so wonderful. So appreciated when sort of a plan comes together, if you will, unplanned, right? As we've said before, Pastor Debbie and I don't communicate a lot about where we're going with things on Sundays. But so often they gel and merge together so wonderfully. And so we're grateful for the Spirit of God that makes that happen. So let me start with a couple of questions this morning. At this point in your life, what is your sense of God's call? And how has God's call changed over the course of your life? At this point in your life, what is your sense of God's call? And how has God's call changed over the course of your life? Our two scriptures this morning are about God's call in people's lives and their response. And of course, we clergy are called by God to serve God's mission in the world and in the church. But all Christians are called to do the same. Not in the same ways, to be sure, but in some ways, nonetheless. My own sense of call started when I was very young. As you remember, my dad was a Baptist minister. And so I basically lived at the church when I was growing up. There was Sunday morning church along with Sunday school. Then there was Sunday night church. Then there was Wednesday evening prayer meeting. Then there was Thursday evening choir practice. Then there were youth groups and all kinds of other meetings as well. And so some weeks I could literally be at the church every single night. But I remember having very powerful feelings about God's call when I was really little. I especially love the story in the Bible of God calling the little boy Samuel through the old priest Eli. We had this great picture book of Bible stories at home that my mom used to read to me out of, and I remember wanting to hear that story of Samuel being called over and over again. Likewise, I loved the story of the Ethiopian eunuch in the book of Acts, as he basically begged Philip to be baptized after hearing the story of Jesus. And one picture out of that picture book that I vividly remember was so exotic. It depicted this slender, dark-skinned, regal African prince standing on a chariot. I was also fascinated as a little boy with the scene on the mountain in the movie The Ten Commandments. You remember this scene where God calls Moses, Moses, put off thy shoes from off thy feet, for the place on which thou standest is holy ground. Most importantly, my impressionable little heart and mind was most impacted in that scene and through that movie and that story by the idea that God cares about the real suffering that people have to endure and calls me and all of us, just like Moses, to do something about it. As I've now spent my whole life trying to relieve human suffering in any way I can, I have to say that that call goes back, at least in part, to the story of the Exodus that totally captivated and enraptured my spirit when I was just a little boy. I've also shared before that my first big theological question came when I was only 6 years old. Looking at the midnight sky filled with the stars on one summer night and pondering the utter vastness of the universe, I asked, Why was I born to my parents and in the United States, and everyone else was born? Why were they born to their parents in their respective places and countries? As a teenager, I was profoundly affected by the book Roots by Alex Haley and the TV miniseries that was based on the book. It was my first introduction to the idea of the complicity of religion in perpetuating and legitimizing injustice, which I wouldn't learn until many years later was not only actually one of the dominant themes of the prophets in the Old Testament, but also central to Jesus' whole message in the Gospels as he strove to reform Judaism in the first century. In short, my own sense of God's call simply started when I was very young and has never stopped. There's really never been a time when I wasn't asking the question, God, what do you want me to do with my life overall? And or what should I do in this or that situation? And I guess my upbringing made this strong sense of call inevitable. But like so many people in the Bible who fought and wrestled with God's call in their lives, I did as well. All my life, all I wanted to do was to help God help people, and I wanted to make some kind of difference in the world. But as I told you before, because of my dad, I ran away as fast as I could from wanting to be a minister. My college years, therefore, were very stressful. I knew that I needed to graduate and get a job and support myself, but I didn't want to be a minister. And yet, at the same time, I couldn't get away from God calling me to do something to help people. I thought about becoming a social worker, or maybe even a lawyer, which, given the arguments that I mustered with my mom along the way, she thought I was especially well suited. But ultimately, I just majored in religion and sociology, which made me, of course, completely unemployable in the real world when I graduated. And when people would ask me the proverbial question, so what do you want to do when you graduate? I'd say, well, I don't know. But I want to be in some kind of full-time Christian service. And then I'd say immediately, but definitely not a minister. Ultimately, as you know, after basically puttering around for a couple of years after college, I finally found my way to seminary, and the rest is a history that I could have never imagined. God's call has taken me to an incredibly different context for ministry over these last 30 years. From North City, as you know, to suburban St. Louis and suburban Kansas City, and from social service ministry to new church ministry, to now being here with you in the most historic UCC congregation west of the Mississippi. Through it all, though it may sound a little naive, and maybe a little bit like a Disney song or movie title, I've just tried to follow my heart. I've listened to the things that have moved me the most in terms of serving God's mission in the world and in the church. And I've never stopped saying to God, if you can show me where you want me to go and what you want me to do, there's no place that I won't go and nothing that I won't do. Likewise, in every context for ministry, I basically prayed the daily prayer all the way along. Show us the way. Help us to know what to do and when to do it. Help us with passion and energy to always live out our call in our lives together as a church. Well, in our scripture this morning from the book of Isaiah, God calls this unnamed servant in the passage not only to be a light to the nation of Israel, but actually to all nations. It's too light a thing, God says, that you should be my servant just to the tribes of Israel. I will instead give you as a light to all the nations, so that my salvation will reach to the ends of the earth. And this call came in the midst of the unnamed servant confessing to God that he was already patently lacking in his service to God's call in Israel. And here, God was now calling him to something even bigger. God's call works in mysterious ways. And then, in our scripture from John's Gospel, there are two questions and one statement that are very helpful to ponder whenever we're trying to respond to God's call in our lives. First, what are you looking for? Jesus asked Peter and Andrew. Or in other words, are you even looking for God's call in your life? We can't respond to God's call if we're not really looking for and honestly considering it. And then, where are you staying? Peter and Andrew asked Jesus. Or in other words, where is God in your life? In responding to God's call, it helps if we actively search out God's presence in our lives and in our world. And finally, the statement from Jesus, come and see. Or in other words, spend some time. Responding to God's call is an ongoing process that involves walking down some pathways of discernment and weighing priorities and asking questions. Come and stay for a while and see. So let me end where I began. At this point in your life, what is your sense of God's call for you? And how has God's call changed over the course of your life? We're all called to serve God's mission in the world and in the church. As we begin yet another new year together, I remain excited to see where God's call will lead us. And I challenge each of you to prayerfully consider today what your sense of God's call is for you right now in your life. And simply ask if God might be nudging you in any new directions. Thanks be to God. Amen.